Over the summer, I went to the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art here in Kansas City to see the special Nikki de Saint-Phalle Rebellion and Joy exhibit. I recorded this whole day in the life, come with me to the museum vlog thing, but then I never got around to editing it, and eventually the exhibit closed, and it sort of felt like the moment for that had passed. But I've been thinking about it again lately in light of the election and the preparation for another terrible Trump presidency and the unending processional of horrific nightmare appointees that each day brings, and this question of rebellion and joy has been on my mind a lot. The reason that I found myself at this exhibit in the first place is that a couple weeks prior, I had this majestic little day of queer and crafty joy. I got a tattoo at this Pride Flash event that was like really lovely and fun. I discovered a local Vietnamese coffee shop called Cafe, and I made a new friend, and my tattoo artist was like asking me about my dress and the fact that I sew, and she asked if I'd ever been to Scraps KC, which I hadn't, but it was like pretty nearby to this tattoo parlor, and it's like a thrift store for craft supplies. So I hopped over there, and that was also lovely, just like part of this magical little day that I was having. So I was in line to pay for my little bags of old bias binding, like this right here. I was wearing this very dress, but I hadn't done this to make it fit better. And an older woman asked me if I was a member of the Nelson-Atkins Museum. And I said, no, not yet. I should say that I do go to this museum all the time. In the summer, I walk there almost every week, and it's free, except that they do charge admission for special exhibits like the one that this video is about. Anyway, this lady asks if I have seen the current exhibit, and again, I say no, not yet. Like, I've seen ads for it, and I keep meaning to go, and she immediately reaches into her purse and pulls out a guest pass to see this exhibit. Mind you, we have exchanged no other words beyond the ones that I am sharing now. She just looked at me in my patchwork dress and my colorful tattoos and decided that I, total stranger, needed to see this. And so eventually I went to this exhibit, and of course I had to wear the dress. I'm no art historian, but quick background. She was born in 1930 and got married at 19 and started having children, but was deeply dissatisfied with her life and also had a ton of trauma. And eventually she had a mental breakdown, and she started creating art as a way of healing from that. Her work was heavily influenced by her feminism and a continuing leftward trend in her politics over the years. She wound up leaving her family to go back to Paris and pursue her art, and there's a lot about the politics of that era that was driving her in the beginning, but just set the scene, right? Like, this is a time when women could not have bank accounts, and a lot of her work, especially her early work, is a reaction to how suffocating she found the limitations on women's lives. She first gained major attention for a series of pieces that she made by shooting them in public exhibitions. She had this idea of wanting to make a painting bleed, so she'd make these sculptures and hide balloons full of paint inside them, and then publicly she would have people come and watch this dainty, pretty white lady with a giant rifle as she would create these explosions. A lot of her early art is heavily driven by this feminine rage, but eventually she makes a pivot towards seeing joy as a radical act. As she put it, after the shooting paintings, the anger was gone, but pain remained. Then the pain left, and I found myself in the studio making joyous creatures to the glory of women. Initially inspired by a pregnant friend, she started making these colorful, large, bulbous women that she called nanas. They started as toy doll-sized creations, but eventually were much larger sculptures. The nanas were often formed in these joyful, dancing poses. And there's a real shift here from the feminine rage of her early work to art that's rooted in possibility. The rage has a purpose, but so does joy. A better world requires some level of imagination to envision and create it. This particular kind of radical imagination and creation remained a theme in her work for the rest of her life. I really only filmed a fraction of this exhibit, but there were a number of highly interactive components that I also really appreciated. They all represented different ways of inviting you to participate in the sort of intellectual exercise that drove so much of her work. That in addition to the rage, you have to find space for joy and play and creation. Holding space for all of those things at once was very important then and now and always. I mentioned at the top that I was introduced to a cool new Vietnamese coffee shop in my day of queer, crafty joy. Well, in the middle of the night, after the election had been called in favor of the white supremacists, Cafe, the aforementioned coffee shop, was vandalized. The news is actually one of first, I think, of many terrible things that I saw when I woke up the next morning. Two racist assholes engaged in an act of destruction, emboldened by the world that they were just shown is possible. The world that millions of their fellow Americans just told them that they would like to manifest. That weekend, people showed up en masse to support Cafe Cafe, like lines out the door all day. And all of that was also people making choices about the world that they believe is possible. I'm not saying that the good cancels out the bad here. I think that it's clear that both of those worlds are possible. I do think it's worth noting that significantly more people showed up to create what I believe is the better world here. What I am mostly saying is that all of this is people responding to ideas about what the world could be and making choices. These are choices made by human beings. No vision of the future, good or bad, is necessarily inevitable. We fight back and stop evil shit in whatever ways the moment calls for, and live and create with the kind of joy and community care that we want to see more of in the world. Rebellion and joy. You have to both clean up the garbage on your street and keep creating joyfully the better world that you know is possible. And for all those times when I don't quite know it, when I can't quite see it, it is important to have activists and also art and stories to show another way. I am so grateful to art and stories and acts of kindness and people that keep my eyes on the better world that is not only possible, but that we are choosing to create. It felt appropriate to take a minute to remind myself of that.